and I'll just make sure their sound is all working. Good evening, folks. Welcome. Welcome to the conversation for the film, The Passengers. We're going to be starting in just a minute. I'll keep talking here so you all know that your audio is working and that you're not entering a silent room. Thank you all for joining us. I see some people are joining from California. Yes, you could use the chat. It's a great way to communicate, especially since we have you all muted. However, I'll tell you now that when you're going to want it, when we open for the Q&A, if you have a question, you could put it in the chat box, and then we will open your mic so you can ask live and interact directly with our amazing panel, which is expanding. It has many surprise guests. I'm going to give it another minute till we actually officially start, so people can get acquainted and get used to Zoom as we slowly adjust here. And in the meantime, I'll share first of all that I'm Isaac Zablocki. I'm Director of Film Programs at the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan, and I'm really excited about tonight's event. Coming up, we have many more programs coming. We haven't announced our fall program in full yet. There's many exciting films coming up, but we will be running a fall film course on new Israeli cinema. So please join us for that. That one is already online, and that's going to be more of a conversation course as opposed to our ongoing series like the one that you're a part of tonight, where we highlight special films with conversations with the filmmakers and more. So tonight's film, we're very excited to bring this film back. I think we hosted its official world or private premiere, and that was all thanks to somebody who's with us online already, David Elcott. You all know David from the film. You got to know him very well there, and he introduced us to this amazing film that I think tells a beautiful story. We have with us the director of the film, Ryan Porush. Ryan, thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me.
David will also be a part of the conversation, if that's okay, if you have questions for David. But we also have as a very special guest, and sorry to give him so much more attention, but Gezi from the film is here with us.
Thank you so much.
Gezi, it's the middle of the night for him. He's calling from Israel, so we're really excited to have you here. And after reviewing the film, I have to admit and reminding myself that Jane Eisner is in this. I said, wow, that's a much better person to lead this Q&A than I ever could. So the person who really helped get this all started in many ways, as you saw from the film, Jane Eisner, writer at large and former editor of the Forward, and really an active member of the Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. Jane, I'm going to hand things over to you, and then we'll gather back when we open it for Q&A. So folks, if you have questions throughout, you could write them in the chat box, and we will call on you when we start the Q&A. Jane, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yitzi. And this is not just a pleasure, but actually a real excitement for me to revisit this story and to be able to talk about it with the key characters here. We're missing one, right? We're missing Demos, but I think you will all agree that this film does a remarkable job of highlighting an extremely important issue, but telling the story as a true storyteller through the individual in the films, through these characters whom we get to know and feel very close to. And I think that's the importance of the film. It's the charm of it and the power of it. So it's a real pleasure to have some of these people with us. We're going to talk some about how the film came about. But before that, because especially we have Gezi here, I think you all felt the way I did, which is when it closed, you want to say, well, what's happened now? Where are they? And so I want to turn this over first to Gezi, if you will. Just tell us a little bit about when you arrived in Israel. How did it happen? And what did it feel like?
Thank you so much. So I made Aliyah last year, year and a half ago, and my friend Demos, he made Aliyah 3 years ago, and still I am happy to be here, but still we have relatives who wait for Aliyah in Gondar. My older sister and my older brother waiting there, and also other close relatives. The same is true for demos. Um, uh, Only from 9,000 Jewish, I think less than 3,000 made Aliyah, and the rest waiting there. Now I'm starting to study in Hebrew University. Before pre-university, it's called Machina, and Bezrat Hashem, I will join in September, starting my nursing program.
Oh, great.
And I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be with my relatives and family. Thank you.
That is wonderful, but also very troubling to hear of the people left behind. Ryan, let's start talking about the film itself. You became absolutely immersed in this. As we saw, you traveled to Africa, to Israel, all around the United States. Tell us how the story came to your attention and why did you decide to tell it in the way that you did?
Yeah, so back in 2017, I was in New York and doing some work with and for David Elcott. And we kind of became friends as well as colleagues. And he, around this time, came back from Ethiopia, where he and his wife, Shira, who is a rabbi, were supposed to be witnessing the final Ethiopian Aliyah. And this is a story that David tells early in the film. And like coming out of a bad dream, he's telling me this story back in New York. It turned out that not everyone was going. Israel was closing their synagogue that they had sponsored in Gondar. They were taking back the Torah, and they were saying the job's finished. And yet the real reporting that seemed to be coming out was that there were 9,000 Ethiopian Jews that were being left behind. So David comes back to New York, and myself as a, Jewish American man from Southern California who had been begged to go on birthright and fell in love with Israel and had since been back several times, this was news to me that there were Jews in the world that wanted to be in Israel that were not in Israel. And David wanted to start an advocacy campaign to bring Ethiopians to America to tell their story, with the hope and assumption that progressive American Jews still had a role to play in this issue, dating back obviously to Operation Moses and Operation Solomon. And so for myself to tell this story, I knew that I needed to get to Ethiopia to establish what life is like there for our characters, for this community, taking the perspective of, a Jewish filmmaker who I was trying to stay curious, but I was certainly skeptical going into Ethiopia, wondering what sort of Jewish community I was going to discover. And it turned out to be more devout and more vibrant than I could have ever imagined. And I appreciate what you said, that this is truly, this is a movie about an issue that is ongoing, but it is also to effectively make an argument, in a sense, about this issue. I knew that I wanted to tell the story of people, of individuals, and of this case of a friendship and of a father figure who emerges in their lives. And so I'm proud that I was able to become friends and establish gain the trust of Gezi and David to get to that level. So that's kind of how it came to be.
And Ryan, I seem to remember that you did a real lot of this yourself. I'm pretty sure you like showed up in my office with a camera and just started asking me questions. It seemed like a very intrepid thing to do. You were going to some pretty difficult places. What was propelling you to do that?
It's a good question. My favorite was when I showed up in the middle of the night in Ethiopia and realized that there was this thing called Ethiopia time that was not like on the normal clock. And so that was fun. That's Gezi. We started our friendship on a great note there. I think really a lot of it goes back to I fell in love with documentary. I was in a NYU graduate program where I learned from some amazing documentary filmmakers like Nanfu Wang, who recently made One Child Nation, and Kirsten Johnson, she made Camera Person, and she's kind of a legend. And so just, I mentioned curiosity earlier, with a little bit of, naivete. Like it's my first film, and I'm so proud of it, including the experience, but I can't say that on my next film, I'll be traveling to Ethiopia alone with no sound person and no crew. And so, I haven't been asked that question yet, but I just cherish the memories of working hard and making the film and truly approaching it as a collaboration with the characters that I'm filming that are appearing on screen, like David and Gezi.
So I want to ask you about that because, as journalists, we're trained not to make ourselves the story. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering how you manage to balance that sense of being literally behind the camera to also developing what seems to be a real empathy and affection for your characters. How did you strike a balance that you felt was right for this film?
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting. I mean, at times when I'm reading all the books that are out there on the issue and doing research, I feel like a journalist. But when I'm filming and my goal is to approach every scene and every day with empathy and understanding, I don't feel like a journalist. I don't know, my favorite documentaries have an abundance of empathy. And so I think that that's a bit of the ethos I'm taking as a filmmaker. But yeah, I think establishing trust and being vulnerable myself. There's so much of me in the film, which I can see and admit, but I'm actually not in the movie at all. Mm-hmm. So I think anyone else that made it would be a different movie just because the relationship between the filmmaker and the characters would have been different.
Yeah. So David, I want to bring you into the conversation because you are just drive the narrative in a certain way. And when you look back at that time now, are there any things that you might have done differently or thought about differently? And before you start to answer, unmute yourself. Oh, we have to unmute him. Ah.
I think I got it.
Doesn't look like it yet.
Oh.
There we go.
There we go. Hi, good evening. Let me start first. I just want to acknowledge when Jane who really was such a vocal advocate, wrote one of the best editorials on Ethiopian Jews. Also, I see Ellen Bittner, who was very involved from the beginning in mobilizing, and Rachel Maycliffe, who's been involved as well with Ethiopian Jews. You know, Brian and I tell a slightly different story. He doesn't want to tell the story of how he drove me crazy. When we came back, we made the decision we wanted to bring two Ethiopians to speak for themselves. And we imagined like a 15-minute quick video, you know, that we could use for an advocacy campaign. That's what I thought Ryan was going to do. Little did I know that he was going to come up with this full-length movie that entailed flying to Ethiopia and videoing in Israel as well. I don't know if you all know this, but there was a recent article, do you know this? The 10 most important movies on Jewish identity that have come out. That included A Serious Man by the Coen brothers. It included Spike Lee's Black Klansman. It included Tony Kushner's Angels in America. And it included Ryan's The Passengers. It's really, you know, gives me the goosebumps, you know, to say that it is considered now as one of the most significant movies. The other complication, Jane, you were more assertive than I wanted to be. Israel is the only country, well, I'll explain why. Israel is the only country in the world, Europe, you know, Western country, that voluntarily took in Black Africans to come in fully as citizens. No other country did that. So to speak of racism, we know there's racism in the world. No country is immune, but the Israeli government did amazing things with Ethiopian Jews. So on one hand, you have that reality. On the other hand, you have the reality of these Ethiopian Jews who were left there. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we felt a very complicated story to navigate because it's easy to look really ugly, except we also have to recognize, you know, that while Israel wasn't keeping its promise, it had done quite amazing things in bringing in Ethiopian Jews. You know, one of the questions asked here is, well, if we raise enough money to just give everybody a ticket, why couldn't they just go to Israel that way? Demos was in college, as was Gezi in Ethiopia. They were the only Jews in the world who were not allowed to go on birthright. The children who had, you know, a Jewish grandparent or a Jewish girlfriend or boyfriend could go to Israel, but Gezi couldn't go to Israel on birthright. Demos couldn't go to Israel on birthright. So if Israel's not giving visas, you can't just drop into a country and say, here I am, I'm staying. So that is what caused the campaign, the idea of a campaign to make it so out there. That's the reason why it wasn't about raising money, because the money isn't only the money to fly them, it's the money to provide Aliyah services, which we recognize Israel says it will do for any Jew coming in. So we felt it would really need an advocacy campaign that the Israeli government would say, yes, we are going to bring in the Ethiopian Jews, which they had said, but they'll actually act on it. Probably it would have not been a bad idea to raise money from the beginning, because the situation in Ethiopia for the Jews who are left is abysmal, is terrifyingly bad. And we did create a fund through NACOJ, the National Association of the Conference on Ethiopian Jews, a Aliyah to College fund that we're trying to raise money so that Gezi wouldn't say this, but when he got his first dorm room, the first time in his life he ever had his own room, he didn't have sheets for the bed, he didn't have a pillow to sleep on, he didn't have towels to shower because those are all expenses he couldn't afford. So there probably we would have been wiser to raise money beyond raising money for the film, which was very important, to raise money as well that could help the community. So I think those things we were balancing with great difficulty, trying to do this in a way that wouldn't be so negative that the federations, the synagogues, the movements, the camps that we went to, the JCCs, would refuse to have us there because we would be seen as an anti-Israeli group. We didn't want that. We consider this one of the most Zionist movies ever produced by people who are deeply, passionately committed to go to Israel, and by Jews who are deeply and passionately committed to the Israel that would celebrate somebody like Gezi being there.
Well, thank you. I do think that there's a difference between being an advocate and being a journalist. So I suppose it gave me the privilege, or one might say the obligation, to point out some things that I think were uncomfortable, but true. I want to pick up on something that David said in terms of this well-deserved honor of being included in that list, which is the idea that this challenges us about Jewish identity. Because I know that even when I met you, there are ways in which I can understand why American Jews and many Israeli Jews feel like, wait a minute, you're not a Jew like us, and it goes beyond skin color. It's also the traditions you have, the points of view you have, and how does your story, Gezi and Ryan, please, if you want to add, come into this as well, how does your story challenge our notion of who's a Jew?
I think I'll intro Gezi here if he's okay with it. Part of, and comes out in the film a bit, part of what was special for me as a filmmaker and special for David as the leader of this campaign and someone who grew to really, really care about the guys, was watching them grow in terms of leaders and speakers in all of these different settings, in front of all of these different audiences, to learn to speak passionately and from the heart, and also pick up on what people wanted to hear, learning about these communities in the US that they had never been a part of. So there were times where Gezi, and it took a while, but he said, my skin is black, but I bleed for Israel and I bleed red blood like the rest of us, and some really powerful, really acknowledging the differences, but making the argument that in Judaism, those differences are not supposed to matter. Gezi, what was your experience in answering a lot of the questions about being a different kind of Jewish person, I guess?
Thank you. First of all, our ancestors believe there is only black Jewish, and then today we understand there is many Jewish. We Ethiopian Jewish have our own culture, our own way of practicing Judaism. But here the government officials say we are not Jewish enough, and we don't accept that because our ancestors, our grandmother and grandfathers lived the way they should, and they practice Judaism. And I think there is no difference between me and us, you. We are together. I mean, we are the same. We are from the same history, from the same ancestors. We believe like this. Thank you.
And Gezi, how do you feel in terms of your role in Israeli society now? Do you feel like an outsider? Do you feel accepted?
Here in Israel?
Yes.
I think that after we made Aliyah, they help us a lot. I feel like home here, but still there is some difference between me and someone who grew up here, in terms of language, in terms of culture. Especially for my mother, it's difficult to go with the system, but they treat us as much as we need. I think there was some racism activity last year and also this year. The black guy killed by the police, and that was painful. And there is also some racism in the system, but it is good to be here, and it is not the worse than staying in Ethiopia, because our ancestor, because our parents hoping and dreaming about Israel. And I think there is a problem here, but it is not big problem as in Ethiopia. I mean, it's better to be here and to fight for our rights, and as a Jewish, and in addition to that, the government help as much as we need, like helping in education, in paying for university, and other activities for newcomers.
Oh, well, thank you. I know that we have some questions, so I want to make sure that we leave time for those who would like to ask things of our guests. Yitzi, may I turn that over to you?
So our first question, first of all, thank you. I'll remind our audience that that first of all, the film is available for the till Friday on our website. So tell your friends, and they can view this conversation on our YouTube page, so they can check that out as well. We'll definitely be continuing this conversation. Of course, if you have conversations, put your questions in the chat and we will call on you. And our first question comes from Susan Walsh. Susan, you're on the line.
Hi. Oops. Okay. Firstly, Ryan, compliments to you on, if this is your first film, on making an excellent film. I found it very emotional, but also really troubling. And I have to separate watching the film from the topic. So I have a couple of questions, many. David, did you feel that your efforts were really well-founded, or would it have been better to have put effort into advocacy in Israel, given that the MP is the one who really managed to get, 1,000 Ethiopian Jews over? And was there no one who really connected with you to run with the ball on this?
So, there is a wonderful, deeply committed advocacy crowd in Israel with whom I work. I mean, these are my colleagues, my friends, people I've known for a very long time. Those people, many of them are around an amazing organization called Yamin Ord. Yamin Ord is a youth Aliyah village in the north that has championed Ethiopian Jews, Chaim Perry and his team. I was close with all of them. They were all in Ethiopia. They were the ones who helped arrange our going to Ethiopia and being able to engage there. So it's not that there weren't Israelis. The problem was, honestly, there was a point in the movie, you may remember, where somebody turned to Gezi and Demos and said, because remember, these guys are speaking Hebrew in most of the places in America. They were speaking Hebrew, talking about educated Jews, right? They speak 3 languages pretty fluently, right?
Yeah.
They asked Gezi and Demos, said, where in Israel exactly do you live, right? They go, you don't understand. We don't live in Israel. We're not allowed to come to Israel. So part of it was the American Jewish community mobilized passionately to get Russian Jews, to get 3/4 of those coming Jews and 1/4 of them not Jewish at all, far, far, far less Jewish than the Ethiopian Jews. In my interfaith work with Christians who are often very critical about Palestinians, I say, look, the only place where Christianity is growing in the Middle East is in Israel. But that's because of the Russian Jews, with the Russians who came in on the Jewish Aliyah. So Israel had done that. Israel, with the American Jewish community, sold its buildings. Well, didn't sell, mortgaged their buildings, took them loans to be able to bring Ethiopian Jews out in the first and second Aliyah of Ethiopian Jews. So the idea that American Jews, that British Jews, Canadian Jews would work for this, would be engaged in this, was what we felt would have impact as it had impact before. What we did not anticipate was an agreement between the JDC, the Joint Distribution Committee, which is American-based, and the JFNA, the Jewish Federations, that if Israel brought in this group, this last group that Sharon and I witnessed, brought them in, they would stop critiquing Israel. And so they felt, actually the American Jewish community felt constrained that they had made an agreement, that was part of the agreement, which was going to close down the compound. In the end, Shira, my wife, raised $25,000 to basically buy out the compound to keep it open when the JDC and the Jewish Agency walked out. So that's what kept it alive. So we felt if we could get some passion in America, get people like you to say, I want to do something about this, that would have impact. So that was really our thinking. It's not that there isn't a campaign in Israel. We're very much connected with them. We showed the movie, the first showing was with Isaac at the JCC, but the second showing the movie was in Israel. We showed it to a group of leaders, including members of the Knesset. Avram Nagusi was there, and journalists to try to promote it as well. So complicated politics, but we're still committed to believe about the advocacy that you all are able to do on behalf of that remnant, including Gezian's family and Demos's families that are still in Ethiopia.
Thank you for your question. Do we have another?
We do not have another question at the moment. Jane, do you have another question that you'd like to ask?
Oh, I always have questions. I do. I just want to pick up actually on what David said, and especially ask this of Ghislaine and Ryan. What should people do? There are still thousands left in Gondar. Clearly, there are also needs within Israel. This issue hasn't gone away. And I'm wondering what you think might be the most effective way of making a change in policy in Israel.
As far as with the film, our biggest goal is to get it into as many Jewish communities as possible and non-Jewish communities to screen it. But the number of people who come up to me and us after they see the film and say, I had no idea this issue was still with us, which is actually, I quoted you, Jane, in the movie. You say that because far too many people thought that this was done after 1991 or, not so long after. And so telling people about the film, hosting screenings, we still have a petition going, the petition that was part of the advocacy campaign that David started. And we're also really excited that we've started a fund. It's called Aliyah to College. We've partnered with NACOJ and SSEJ, who are two of the leading organizations on this issue for decades. And this is for people who want to support young Ethiopian Israelis like Ghislaine who need help with room and board at university. And so this is, in a sense, not that the film is scared of getting political, but this is kind of a non-political way of supporting the Ethiopian Jewish community, those who have made it to Israel and still need guidance. And I'll let Gezi or David jump in with more on our continued advocacy.
Well, Gezi, I wonder if you could tell us what is something that you really want us to take away from this experience of not just seeing the film and hearing from you, but how should this affect how we are as Jews? What should we know?
I think the film is explained briefly and shortly about my community. And we believe, I would rather to say in Hebrew, if David is going to translate it. David Atapo. David. Okay. That's fine, I will say it in English. Yeah, the film explained briefly.
Okay,
And
you can talk in Hebrew. It's good to show off anyway to them how you move from one language to another. You haven't given this Amharic yet, but it's good for everybody to hear what a bright, educated gift to Israel you are, and all of your buddies that are waiting to come and participate in Israel.
טוב, אז מה שאני רוצה להגיד, ההיסטוריה של הסרט והקהילה שלנו זה אמיתי, זה לא סתם, זה חיים של אנשים שמבזבזים כל החיים שלהם בלחכות ובתקווה.
So what you're seeing here is real, and in particular the ways that his community is wasting their lives, literally their lives passing them by, because I'm going to add, they're in limbo. That's why it's called Passengers. They're no longer Ethiopian. They're no longer engaged in Ethiopia, but they can't go to Israel. And so they're stuck in this strange limbo, wasting their lives.
ויש שיר אחד בעברית, קוראים לו כתונת פסים, ושמה באמת בדיוק מסביר על הקהילה שלנו. היה ליוסף חולצה, הייתה לה 12 צבעים, ואנחנו מאמינים, צבע אחד זה צבע שלנו, צבע של יהודי אתיופיה, ובסוף עם הצבע, אם אנשים מאמינים בתנ"ך, בהיסטוריה של יהודים, הם צריכים לקבל גם הקהילה שלי כצבע אחד, ככה אנחנו מאמינים.
So when, as Gezi said, he said how his grandmother was shocked to hear that there actually could be Jews who were white, that they see themselves and understand themselves as one color of a multicolored Jewish culture, and that the one color unites as one people. Just a caveat on the side, y'all know we're dealing with this in America, right? Aren't all Jews Yiddish speaking, white, from the shtetl? Isn't that what you have to be Jewish? And if you can't speak some Yiddish, you're not really a Jew. So this is not an issue unique to Israel, in the same way that white is the unmarked dominant culture, and black seems like, well, wait, who are you and what are you doing? So for Gezi, it's very important that he's saying that there are multiple colors, but they unite as one.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. It feels like that's like a really important note to end on, because your story elevates us all and challenges us all to be better people, to be better Jews, to care about each other. So I want to thank you, Ryan and Gezi, so much for your willingness to tell the story, and to David, as always, for your advocacy and for your compassion. And thank you, Yitzi, for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ryan and David and Gezi, for being here and for sharing this film with us. Folks, tell your friends this film can still be watched, and this conversation, of course, is a great next step to take, and that will be available tomorrow on our YouTube, or maybe even, no, it's live on YouTube, so it's there already. And thank you all for joining us. We'll have much more for you this coming fall. Please stay safe, everyone. We want to see you in person really soon. Thank you so much for being a part of this and for watching these important films and for being so supportive. Thank you so much and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Please, let's keep in touch.
Definitely. Take care.